Hello, and welcome to the Up and Comer Show. This is a podcast all about learning how to live a good life. If you're new here, how we do that is with our mantra of having intention in the tension. We believe life is filled with tensions that we have to marry and live within, and this show really kind of unpacks some of that from the up-and-comers perspective, from the journey, about the journey from the journey we are on. And today is going to be a fun episode, but before we get there, some housekeeping. First off, follow us on the socials at up-and-comers, That's where you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. We are on it. And email, if you want to send us an email, theupandcomershow@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you guys think of recent episodes. If you have any questions you want Adam and I to unpack, or just any thoughts you want to share, definitely reach out. If you haven't left us a rating and review, we would love it if you could help us in that way. It really just is a super big support method, a support tool for helping more people find our show and tune in and listen to what we're sharing. So if you wanted to leave us a rating review on iTunes, that would be so awesome and helpful. And if you leave a few comments on that review, Adam and I will likely read it on air. So you'll get to be a celebrity then, which is pretty sweet. We do have a Patreon set up, which is a great place if you wanted to throw a couple dollars our way each month to help us keep the lights on. It's an awesome way to support financially. And as of this last week, we actually launched something new, and that is a YouTube channel. So we are now on YouTube because that is such a big medium for information and education. So we wanted to just get launched on there. So that started up this last week. Definitely check it out. Starting from episode 80 on, everyone will be available on YouTube. So just, search the Up and Comer Show and we'll pop right up. We also have a little intro video we put together, so you can check that out as well. And that brings to the last announcement, which is meet Oksana. Oksana is our newest member of the Up and Comers team and is a big reason why that YouTube channel was launched. So if you want to learn about Oksana, go to theupandcomershow.com and click on the socializer, and that is Oksana. So she is joined the team, is going to be doing a lot of the online presence work that is needed in any endeavor. So we're so thankful to have her on the team. Definitely read up more on her on the website and tune in to hear more about her and her story in the months ahead. So be excited for that. If you knew Cassidy, she was a part of the team for a while. She did an awesome job, and she just had a lot going on in life. And so she is killing the game in her businesses and just wasn't able to put as much time into the show. And so God just brought Oksana, and here we are with another member on the team, and it's been a fun transition. So excited to share more about her in the future, but definitely check her out on our website. Okay, enough announcements. Man, I keep being really long-winded with announcements. So today, there is no Adam, there is no guest, and it is just me, Thane, speaking into a mic. So it will be short and sweet, but I hope it airs on the sweet side and not necessarily the short side. And if you want to hear, or if you want to find all the show notes for it, you can go to theupandcomershow.com/episodes/reality. So I titled today's little solo episode, I titled it, 2 Realities of Human Existence. And really what this is just sharing a mental model for helping us grow in self-awareness. Self-awareness is massive. It's very important in today's society, and it's one of those things that is increasingly diminishing in today's society. It's something that doesn't just happen by chance, and with the nature of technology and information and the pace of life that we live, our self-awareness has been decreasing by the day a lot of times. So this is just a mental model that I've found to be really helpful in growing in self-awareness. And it's something that I've been doing a lot more of workshops on and speaking towards, and so I thought it'd be helpful to share with you all today, and it's something that's been super helpful for me, which kind of speaks to this quote from Carl Rogers, who said, "That which is most personal is most universal." So usually the things that are most personal to us are the things that are most universal, that we would all understand through our own experience. So I think that's part of why I wanted to share this framework for growing in self-awareness. So this framework is in short, is that in life as human beings, we are all first in process and second on a spectrum. So we are all in process and we are all on a spectrum. So what does that mean? Let's unpack that a little bit. First off is in process. So being in process is really moving from point A to point B, growing from this reality into that, moving from where we are now to where we want to be. It is definitely more of a lateral process, right? Kind of moving across life, moving into what's next, moving throughout the career path, moving down the road. It's a journey, right? And so it's a process that we're on. And the interesting thing about that is that there are also processes within the process. So it's not just that there's one process we're in. Usually there's many processes that we're in at a time, and some of those processes are sub-processes. That's kind of confusing, but you would all understand that we are ultimately in a process. Ralph Waldo Emerson, life is a journey, not a destination. And that's really what this is about. We're on a journey in life, and there really isn't a within life itself. Ultimately, that final destination we know is death. And then after death, we stand before God. And so that is the big picture. But within life, we're in a process, and that is the journey of life. I actually wrote a blog post a while back it was on perspectives, and it was titled "The Destination is Less Than the Journey," and kind of unpacking this whole reality that life is a journey and not a destination, and why that's good. So visit the show notes if you want to read more on that. So that's the first one, that we're all in process. The second is that we're all on a spectrum. So this means that at each place in the process, we are somewhere on a spectrum within that reality. Meaning like there's a range of possible ways to experience and handle the specific reality in which you find yourself now. So the way you experience it and the way that you're dealing with it may be drastically different than someone else that finds himself in maybe that same almost identical experience. So I think this highlights the fact that where we find ourselves on that spectrum, it really stems from our natural predispositions, and the lived experiences that we've had thus far in life. Richard Barnett said one of my favorite quotes. He said that human intellectual development is a lifelong dialogue between inherited tendencies and our life history. And it's really just saying that we have a combination of tendencies that we've inherited from both our genetics and our family and our parents and all of that, and then also our life history, which is the experience we've lived as long as we've been alive and how that's shaped us into who we are today. So that really shapes the spectrum of where we're at and why we find ourselves in that place on the spectrum. And I think the spectrum really ties in most with the mantra that we have, having intention in the tension. And I think that the spectrum shows that in most places in life, there's two polar opposite realities that could both be true, and everyone is somewhere between those two forces. And usually being in the middle, in the place of most tension, is the best place for us to be. And so we're always fighting to get to that place if we're intentional about it. So that's a little bit about in process and on a spectrum. And I think it's cool to see just if we zoom back a little bit and just look at the big picture of life, it really kind of talks about how life is dynamic, right? It is always moving and shifting and shaping, and it is very complex. It's very hard to refine things to simplified forms. And each moment within life is like a snapshot. It tells a story, and that snapshot, that story that we see in that snapshot, it has two different dimensions to it. It has both the past and the future of where we've been and where we're going, and also has the present, where we're at on the spectrum in that moment. And that kind of is, again, in the process and on the spectrum. And so I think this really speaks to both the lateral and linear versions of life and how this relates to process and spectrum. The lateral, when we move from A to B across the horizons, across our lives, that's the process. And the linear, where we're at in that process, is the spectrum that we're on. So just different ways to say this. And I think you get the picture. So really there's a couple other aspects to it. I think at its core, what is the benefit of self-awareness and growing in our understanding of in the process and on the spectrum? I think one of the greatest benefits of it is empathy. Because empathy, it can be seen by striving to understand where someone is at on their own process and on the spectrum within where they're at in that process. So empathy is really trying to understand where the person is at in their process and on the spectrum. And there's a great quote by Henry Boyle who said, "The most important trip you may take in life is meeting people halfway." So that's kind of a version of empathy, is understanding, looking at people and trying to listen and see them for where they're at in the process and where they are on the spectrum within that process. Integrity is also, I think, a component of this. It could be seen in how well you align your behaviors with what you communicate about yourself, both to yourself and to others. So, integrity is being who you say you are, right? That's a kind of a simplified version of it. And so the more we can understand where we are in the process and on the spectrum, we'll be able to better align our behaviors with what we communicate to ourselves and to others about ourselves. So I think empathy and integrity are both effects or related to this understanding and self-awareness as a whole. So to end, I really just want to end with a few questions to ponder. So the questions are, where am I in the process and where am I on the spectrum, right? Pretty simple. So let me just unpack that for myself just to kind of share some personal things. So for me, I'm in very, I think it's important to understand that where we are in the process also involves what process we're actually in. And as I said earlier, we can be in a lot of processes at the same time within a greater process. And so for me, I'm in many processes. Some of those include learning how to reopen myself up to love and to feelings and emotion in a healthy way. Learning how to lead a team well, going from kind of a solopreneur into a team and entrepreneur and leadership. I'm learning how to grow and develop as a speaker, coming from not as much background and starting to gain experience and grow into what an experienced speaker entails. In the process of learning how to shift from saying yes to everything to saying no to almost everything. I'm also in the process of learning how to not just value the knowledge of God, but also the experience of Him and intimacy with Him too. So there's a lot of different processes that I'm in. Those are just a handful of them. But I think that if we can have a good understanding, like for me, if I can see those things clearly and understand where I am in that process, it helps me better align both my expectations with reality and be prepared for the next step to take in that process. The second question of where I am on the spectrum, in light of the process I'm in usually, is an important follow-up. For me, the main spectrum that I find myself in is related to my inner drive and kind of competitive nature, and also how I disciplined and wired myself as a professional athlete, which is much different than normal life in a lot of ways. So I think this entails kind of moving from finding worth in what I do toward finding worth in who I am. And I think that could be two different opposite realities, finding worth in what we do versus who we are, kind of a doing versus a being. So I think I've been more on the doing side, and I'm working to the other end of the spectrum of more being. I think, I also wrote a blog post about these three different archetypes, being a thinker, a doer, or a feeler. And And I am much more of a doer turned thinker and now embracing being a feeler. And so I think on that spectrum between those three, I'm strong in the doing. I've grown a lot stronger in the thinking, and now I'm trying to grow in the feeling side. On the spectrum of being a workaholic to a lazy bum, I'm a recovering workaholic who's been moving steadily closer to the healthy middle, but definitely am still kind of on the overworking side. So in that spectrum, I'm on the overworking side, but I'm much closer to center than I've ever been, I think. On the spectrum, and the last spectrum is really the spectrum of man's responsibility to God's sovereignty, one of the greatest tensions of faith, and a beautiful one in that. And I think I've rebounded initially from the man's responsibility side over to the God's sovereignty side, and now I find myself trying to move back a little bit more toward middle again. So I think that's just a little picture of where I am in that process. But all this to say, I share those just to share that the point is we will always be at some place on the spectrum, and the goal should always be to find out what side of the fence we're on and then try to move towards the middle, more away from that side that we're on. And similarly, if we can see what process we're in and where we are in that process, we'll be better able and better equipped to move forward more effectively and more aligned in our expectations of what's to come. So my challenge this week to you is to be thinking, where am I at in the process? And where am I at on the spectrum? As the famed mystic poet Rumi once said, your boundaries are your quest. So use these two questions to help you push up against those boundaries on your quest. If you enjoyed this solo episode, definitely send us your thoughts. Let us know. And if you want the full show notes, check out theupandcomershow.com/episodes/reality. That's all for now. Tune in next week to hear an exciting new interview dropping on the Up and Comer Show. We hope you have an up and coming week.